Good evening. Oh, yeah, the mic's on. Good evening, everyone. It is good that you are here. Our program will take place from this space tonight, and so it's all right to change seats if you want to be closer to the speaker. Please go ahead and do that now. My name's Kelly Kirby, and I am the rector of St. Matthew's. Thank you for coming out on this St. Patrick's Day, and welcome to Dimensions of Faith, a twice-a-year speaker series in which St. Matthew's invites thinkers and writers to explore the interface of religion and culture. We continue to challenge our minds and renew our spirits through this series. After the program, there will be a book signing reception outside of the red doors, and you're all welcome to stay. The restrooms are located just down the hall from the welcome desk. Beginning next Sunday, we will pray our way through Holy Week, and you are invited to spend some or all of your days here. And you're even welcome to enter our PEEP Holy Week diorama competition. Bishop White will again be the judge. I hope that you'll come back for our next lecture, where John Lansing, CEO of NPR, will speak less than a month before the November election. It's now time to invite Robin Garr to come forward to introduce our speaker.
Bravery. What does it look like? For a bishop, standing on the shoulders of Jesus and the disciples as Holy Week nears, does it look like Peter, who denied and ran away before coming back to take charge? Does it look like John, standing with Jesus' family at the foot of the cross? Does it look like Thomas, who doubted until he saw with his own eyes? Or does it look like Mary Magdalene, recognizing the risen Jesus at the tomb with joy and delight? Rabboni. Our guest tonight knows bravery. She even wrote a book about it. The Right Reverend Mariann Edgar Budde, 9th Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Washington, D.C., and the first woman in that position, was called to be brave on June 1st, 2020. That was the day when St. John's Church in Washington became a flashpoint. U.S. Park Police and National Guard members used tear gas and projectiles to clear a crowd protesting the murder of George Floyd from Lafayette Square. That's the public space between the church and the White House. Why did they do that? So President Donald Trump could use it for an unauthorized photo op holding high a Bible. How would Bishop Budde respond? She deeply believes what we all pledge in our baptismal covenant, with God's help to strive for justice and peace and to respect the dignity of every human being. Bishop Budde spoke truth to power. She spoke for those injured, hurt, and oppressed. Everything the past president had said and done, she told the Washington Post, is to inflame violence. We need moral leadership, and he's done everything to divide us. The president would be welcome to come and pray, to greet the church, and to offer encouragement, she said. He is always welcome to be part of the worshiping body, but not to use the mantle of the church to communicate a political message. To stoke the flames of anger and a punitive response to what's happening in the country, I think, is short-sighted and not the moral leadership we need. In her 2023 book, We Learn to Be Brave, she addressed bravery as pivot points, those decisive moments in life when we're called to push past our fears and act with strength. Bravery is responding with clarity and grace, even in the toughest times. It's a journey that we can all choose to undertake every day. Tonight, we look forward to learning more from Bishop Mariann about bravery and about speaking truth to power, too. It is my great pleasure to welcome our Dimensions of Faith speaker, the Right Reverend Mariann Edgar Budde.
Hi. Thank you for that introduction. I'm tempted to tell you what I wasn't thinking on June 1st. You know, it was one of those moments when I didn't have time to think. Right? So I'll just leave you with that there are some moments when we have to respond with whatever it is we've got, right? And that put me on a journey to thinking how we learn bravery. And I am here to assure you that I am a student alongside of you, and that the most important moments are not the ones when the camera's rolling and when the microphones are in your face. Those come and go so quickly as to almost be, I won't say irrelevant, but not the measure upon which bravery rests, but rather how we live our lives in between those moments and how we align ourselves with the glimmers of insight and courage that God gives us along the way. I'm really happy to be here. I couldn't believe my good luck when the invitation came months ago now. And to be actually here, I've had such a wonderful day in the presence of this fantastic community. If you are a guest tonight, I can't tell you how welcoming and wonderful this congregation and its leadership is. And if you've been listening along today, I hope that this evening's time is a continuing of at least an internal conversation, and maybe we can have some back and forth as well. So let's just jump in. Yeah, you can just leave that there for a second. Let's just consider for what a decisive moment is. They're the moments when we're called upon to act with courage, and to our absolute astonishment, we do. We all want to be brave when it counts, to bring our best selves when we're called upon, to speak with clarity and conviction in a pivotal situation. And I would say to you that decisive moments are those times in life when it happens. And they're marking events in that they stand out in our memory, and they are often what people remember about us. I mean, I think June 1st, 2020 is what people are going to remember about me for the rest of my life. I'm not sure that's a great thing, but it's one of those marking events. We feel this rush of adrenaline. We are acutely aware of what's happening. We feel alive, so much so that the rest of our lives can seem dull and uninspired by comparison. And that is dangerous, because then we can get addicted to the feeling of adrenaline, which is not always the indication of courage, if you know what I mean. And these moments are almost always preceded by seasons of preparations, whether we know it or not. And they are followed by an equally important season of alignment, in which we learn to live according to what a decisive moment revealed to us or set in motion. And how we respond, how we prepare for a decisive moment determines our ability to step up to them when they come. And how we live in light of them is in the end what determines their significance, not so much the moment itself. Just a couple other things about them. In general, Obviously, they involve choice, impressing their significance upon them as we experience them. For we may interpret them differently over time, but we know we're going through them when they're happening. And we're choosing a particular path of potential consequence. Now, some of these moments are public, most are private. Some are evident to the people around us, others are known only to us, an intimate few, and to God. Yet these are the moments that shape our lives and make us the people that we are and who God calls us to become. They come in many forms and require a wide range of decisions. And then I want to say this again. There are long stretches in life when nothing decisive seems to be happening, right? But in retrospect, we can see that those were either seasons of preparation or that we're living after decisions that set us on a particular course. And part of coming to terms with the arc of our lives includes, and hear this, the entirely predictable and emotionally unsettling experience of complete emptiness after a decisive moment passes. There is tremendous letdown sometimes. And that's when we learn to place these intense moments within the arc of a lifetime and trust that most of life is lived in smaller acts of faithfulness, not the big ones. And that's when we cultivate perseverance, to keep going when life is hard and a little bit dull. And because we're human, we make mistakes. We make lots of mistakes. And as it turns out, how we respond to them and our moments of realization, when you realize you've made a mistake, worse, a mistake that you were really proud of making while you were making it. How we respond in those moments are among the most important decisions we can make. Right? So I'm going to highlight a few of the decisive moments that are kind of the chapters in the book and what we learned from them. And as I go, I really invite you to allow your mind to recall moments in your lives. So the first, deciding to go. Probably the most dramatic and certainly the most visible decisive moment when we leave one place or one way of being ourselves and move toward another. And the journey begins long before we take that first step. It usually is some kind of inner stirring, a precipitating event, an invitation that catches our heart by surprise. And we feel summoned somehow to go beyond the borders of our life as we now know it. It's not uncommon for us to resist, or for resistance to come from other people who want or need us to stay where we are. Complete readiness to go is rare. We're like fledglings that need to be pushed out of the nest because we don't know that we have wings until we have to fly. So think of the classic coming-of-age stories. And the journey there often begins in response to a situation beyond the protagonist's control. Think of Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, blown out of Kansas by a tornado. Most of us resist, as I said, like Frodo in Lord of the Rings, who wished that the Ring of Mordor had never come to him. Sometimes the journey begins with liberation. Think of Harry Potter, freed from the miseries of 4 Privet Drive, when he stepped out onto the train of Hogwarts, where he would discover his true identity and powers as a wizard. And we can't, we read those stories, or if you have children, you read them to your children. We can't help but see ourselves in these stories, right? These are what Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey. And when we feel that summons to go, the experience is thrilling, it's exhilarating, it's terrifying. And we might hesitate at first. because there's a lot at stake. Now, the archetypal decisive moment in my life that got me even thinking about such things happened when I was 17. And that was the year my family fell apart, which wasn't a strong family to begin with, but 17, it all blew wide open. And my dad informed me that he was leaving my stepmother, and I was welcome to come with him, but I was not to tell her that he was leaving until after the fact. I didn't know very much, but I knew for darn sure that I wasn't going anywhere with my dad. And I also knew that I couldn't stay with my stepmom. I didn't know what clinical depression was. I didn't know what alcoholism was. I just knew that my dad was not safe to be around alone. And my stepmom didn't like me very much because I was often caught in the triangle between their marriage. Now, as it turned out, I'd become a Christian by that time, and I was worshiping in a very close-knit community, an evangelical church. I had had a conversion experience. I was surrounded by love in that community, and the minister and his wife, they took me in for a time. I had great friends in high school that had become my surrogate family, and I loved them fiercely. I was in the high school musical. I had a lead for the first time. I had a boyfriend who was off in college. I was a junior. He was a freshman. So there was nothing in my life that said to me, go. In fact, I really wanted to stay right where I was. And all of the other adults in my life, the minister, my high school teachers, they were all helping me figure out how I could stay, right? And I knew in my heart that I had to go. And I knew where. I had to go back and live with my mom, whom I had abandoned when I was a child, when my parents had a pretty nasty custody battle, and my sister and I did just about everything we could to persuade the judge to give our father custody of us, which he did, which you can imagine was devastating to my mother. In the years that we had been separated, she kept in touch with me, even though you could imagine at first how awkward and painful those conversations were by telephone. She went on to heal and to live a happy and whole life. And when this whole constellation of events happened, as much as on the external side of things, I wanted to stay, there was this inner clarity that I'd never felt before, telling me I had to go. And it was interesting because I was, in listening to that voice, I was going against the religious authority of my life for the first, the minister of my church. Because my mother, spoiler alert, she was an Episcopalian. And in the tradition I was in, that was not considered Christian, right? These were loving, wonderful people, but they had a narrow view of what it meant to be a follower of Jesus, right? Which I struggled with, but I didn't argue about because they had given me so much. But anyway, so he was telling me that if I went back to live with her, I might backslide into sin. And I loved him. He was the authority and I knew he was wrong. And so I decided to listen to the voice inside. It was a horrible leave-taking. I cried all the way on the plane from Colorado to New Jersey. It was not an easy landing. I don't want you to imagine going back to New Jersey was easy. But everything I am in my life now, I attribute to that decision. And not the least of which is the experience of listening to that inner authority that God sometimes gives us, speaking to our hearts. It hasn't happened very often in my life. It's happened a few times since, but not often. But that sense of going and being defined by that changed me forever. And whenever people ask me to think about a courageous moment in my life, that's the one I remember, because it marked me and set me on the course that has defined me ever since. Okay. Now, in Scripture, obviously, there are a whole bunch of examples of these kind of going stories. And you look like reasonably intelligent Christian people. I just wonder if you might name a few, just popcorn style. What's a going story from Scripture? Noah, thank you. Abraham, Elijah, Jonah, yeah, Jeremiah. So all the biblical prophets, right? Hearing a summons to go. What about the disciples? You know, those early stories of the disciples, they hear Jesus' come follow me, and they just get up and go, right? So there's this sense of like, this is what it means to be faithful. The great thing about Abraham is that he is the bedrock of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim faith, this nomadic man tribesman who left. And what I love about that story most of all is its brevity, right? In fact, all of them are pretty brief, like the Lord said go, so Abram went. Okay. But, we can fill in the gaps. I didn't know then Eleanor Roosevelt's decision of courage. Maybe you know it. Doing what you think you cannot do, which I think is as good a definition as I've ever found. And in some ways, many of the times, we can't do what we're being asked to do. We grow into being the person who can do what we're asked to do by taking those steps. Okay. I wonder if you might call to, just in your own mind, if you could just settle on a memory for yourself. And if this is such a time for you, or if there's someone you love who is at such a moment, may you or they be blessed in the going. If you are close to someone who is taking leave of you, be sure to give them your blessing, which is the highest form of love, even if everything in your bones tells you you want to hang on as tightly as you can. Okay, next. Moving to the opposite end of the experiential spectrum. The times in life when the decision we make with enormous consequence isn't to go anywhere at all, but to stay right where we are. It's a really different experience in that there's very little drama, there's very little adrenaline, there's not a lot of outward attention. And because of that, staying put can seem like taking the easy way. And yet, in my experience at least, deciding to stay can be equally brave and consequential as going. And making that choice, particularly when there are compelling reasons to leave, involves a similar internal struggle and building sense of crisis, like you need to make a decision, leading to a decision to go deeper into the life you've already got, as opposed to going somewhere else. And because going is rightfully associated with adventure and the adventurous side of courage, choosing to stay can appear, and it certainly can feel, as if we're settling for less. And yet, depth, which is the fruit of stability, is essential to a mature life and our capacity to make a lasting difference in the lives of other people. So, when we choose to stay, we acknowledge, among other things, that there's more at stake than what we may want. And we learn that there's more than one way to live a brave life. And some of the most courageous decisions we make are the ones that no one sees, right? I reference in the book the marriage between Eleanor and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And I'll just leave, maybe you know their story, but one of the most consequential decisions of the 20th century was Eleanor's decision to stay married to Franklin when he was having an affair with a woman named Lucy Mercer, who was the love of his life. This was way before he was president. And when she found out about it, she offered to give him a divorce because she didn't want to stay married to a man who didn't love her. And she was absolutely resolute about that. And Franklin, who had significant political aspirations, was finally persuaded by his advisor that if he divorced Eleanor, his career would be over. Remember, this was 1918. Divorce was a scandal in high society. His mother, who was basically bankrolling his lifestyle, also said to him that if he divorced her, life would end for them. So he was begging her to stay. And she said, okay, provided that he wanted her and that he promised never to see Lucy again. And he assured her that he did want her and that he wouldn't see Lucy again, which turned out not to be the case. But they went on. Their marriage was completely different after that. Shortly after that, he contracted polio and almost died. And Eleanor was at his side. And she realized, as he lay almost dying, that not only did he have aspirations for his life, she had aspirations for his life and wanted to be alongside him. And so they formed this partnership, very bizarre in some ways, when you read about it, like what actually went on in the White House. It's a good thing that tabloid press stayed away from these things, or things would have been very different. All I'm saying is that her decision to stay married allowed them to be the most stable couple in the world when we needed them more than we realized to get us through what was happening in the 1930s and 40s. And Eleanor went on. You hear what I'm saying? The decision to stay. Nothing in my life is nearly that dramatic, but I do remember the day I kind of woke up in my 30s. And most of my adolescent and young adult life was defined by going, right? Lots of going, lots of up and down and drama and adventure. And I wake up in my early 30s, and I was married. We had a house with a mortgage. We had a 3-year-old and a newborn. And I was working a full-time job that I was supposed to love. And I did love it most of the time. And I loved a lot about my life, which made it hard to talk about how I felt sometimes. We were in Toledo, Ohio at the time, and Nancy Griffith had a song on the radio with a refrain, or the opening line was, I'm working on a morning flight to anywhere but here. And I would sing that at the top of my lungs, I'm anywhere but here. And I realize now, looking back, it's comical, but I realize now that it was a call to learn what it means to be stable. I hadn't had a lot of stability in my life. And I was learning the cost of stability, which is a recurring theme for me when I wrestle with the call to stay. And I've had to learn time and time again that faithfulness isn't always taking these big dramatic leaps. It's these tiny steps of faithfulness. And that it's possible to make a lasting difference in the world by tending to one small corner of it. And especially if you want to make a difference in the life of other people, to be the ones that they can count on so that they can go off and have the adventures, knowing that it will be there for them when they come back. Right. Now, I just want to say a couple of things. In no way do I want to suggest that staying in abusive or harmful situations is God's will, or that self-sacrifice is always the path of love, just to be clear. And pursuing our heart's desire can be among the most life-affirming choices we make. All of that's true, even when it takes us away from other commitments. But what I want to emphasize is that in the course of a well-lived life, we also need seasons of groundedness, time to develop deep relationships, and to discover the hidden treasures of longevity. There's a different kind of joy in being the one that others can count on. And that certainly was true for me, for us in our parenting years. And now it's completely shifted. Because now my caregiving responsibilities are for my mom at the other end of the life cycle. And I'm the one now who cares for her. She's 92 years old. She moved in with us during COVID. She's living very close by. And I am daily reminded of faithfulness and how sometimes loving asks us to stay right where we are. Right? So I wonder now if you just might think of times when you felt the call to stay. Just as a caveat to this experience, I think it's important to mention that sometimes staying isn't because of a choice we make, but is the fruit of disappointment. When a door of opportunity closes that we wanted to walk through, there's no denying that staying can feel like a failure. It's happened to me several times. And yet, we also learn the hard way that disappointments are unavoidable in life. And after a necessary season of grieving about that, the time to stay where we are is often when the seeds of new possibility are planted and slowly take root in us. And if we're not going anywhere, there's time and opportunity to tend to things like our character and to hone some skills, to savor grace in small packages, and to learn perseverance. And just in closing, I just want to call your attention to one of my favorite gospel passages. It's found in the Gospel of John, and it's right at the end of chapter 6 where Jesus has he's had the miracle of the loaves and fish, right? It's a great miracle. And then in the Gospel of John, as Jesus often does, he then starts to preach for like an entire chapter. And it's on bread and, blood and eating. It's just all the things that we associate with Eucharist. And by the time you get to the end of that chapter, the line is something like, that's when people decided that these sayings were hard. And many decided not to go about with Jesus anymore. Like, okay, buddy. And this very poignant exchange, Jesus looks at the 12 and he says something to the effect of like, well, what about you? Do you also wish to go away? And Peter, of course, speaking for the 12, says, well, Lord, where would we go? We believe you have the words of eternal life. I don't know about you, but there are more times than you might be surprised to know, since I'm a bishop and everything, that the times I've chosen to stay in the Christian faith, even though I had lots of reasons to go, right? Because I didn't know where else to go. Because Jesus had kind of won my heart, right? So like, where would I go? So we stay. With me so far? Doing okay? All right, I'm going to keep on going, and I'm going to stop to give us a little time to reflect on it. Move on to the next kind of deciding to start. It often, for me, the starting decisions usually came, I should say, looking back, in the midst of disappointment or in a season of grief. But it can happen just as likely as it comes to us like in a dream or in a revelation, like a really hopeful thing. when a new possibility beckons us, and it's way out ahead, like in the horizon of our lives, and we see it clearly, but there's an enormous distance between that dream, goal, hope, and where we are right now. And the decision to start, it has some things in common with going, in that it's involving movement. But the difference is that initially, there's a very minuscule notice of any change. In fact, probably nobody around us would even know that we've done it because of the preparation required and how far the destination lay. And so deciding to start can be a really lonely experience, can be very solitary, in part because the first steps are so small and the journey's long enough that the odds of completing it are not very high. So it's not a given that we'll get there. And it's also true that not every resolve to start results in any dramatic change. But those who do make it to the end generally trace the beginning of that journey to a moment that hardly anyone around them noticed. Right? I watched a woman in the congregation I served in Minneapolis go through this. Her name was Cindy. And she was a mother of 3. She had been working in an office. She's very active in our church, probably in her mid-30s when this moment happened. And she walked in my office one day and said, "I've decided to become a nurse." And I said, "Great." No idea what that meant. Well, it meant for Cindy going back to remedial college first because she barely graduated. I mean, she graduated from high school, but not with any notable academic credentialing. She never made it through college, so she had to go back. She had to do all this at night with her 3 babies in tow. She then got accepted into nursing school, and she had to go part-time for another 3 years until she could finally go full-time for another year, right? All this happening while the rest of us were just seeing Cindy be Cindy, right? Showing up at church, doing what she did, never really kind of forgetting that she was on this path that required her to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to read or study before her kids got off to school, stay up late at night, just day after day, year after year. She finally graduated in 2009, which was in the middle of the recession, and there were no jobs. So for her first, 3 years as a nurse, she was working as a night aide in a residential facility, which was basically emptying bedpans and caring for people, but not really nursing. It took another 3 years before she got the job that is now her dream job, right? And when I think of what she went through, and I actually, when I was thinking about this book, I called her up and I said, "Can I just ask you what that was like? And did you ever," she just walked me through. And I said, "Did you ever think of quitting?" And she said, "No, not really. But I don't know if I, and you know what this feeling is like." She said, "I don't know that if I knew when I started what it was going to take, that I would have taken that first step." Isn't that the way it is? Yeah. I wonder if you have a beginning to start, a decision to start moment. Humans are not unique in our capacity to begin journeys of great consequence. My bird-watching husband, who just arrived last night, or tonight I should say, from 3 weeks in Colombia studying birds, he tells me of certain species of birds that make migratory treks from the tip of South America all the way to Canada, right? How on earth do they know when to start, and what keeps them on course toward what only they can see, intuit? How does that work? Where humans differ, I think, is in our capacity to envision possibilities beyond our sight and move toward them. It's not instinct alone that propels us. There's a spiritual beckoning toward a destiny. But the choice is ours to make, even if we're feeling summoned by a presence or an energy all our own. And when we make the decision, the path may seem clear enough, as in a course of study or vocational accreditation, but sometimes the path gets really fuzzy. And we're in the thick of it, but we can't see anymore where we're going, which is how the novelist E.L. Doctorow described the process of writing. He said, often you can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make a whole trip that way. And I think that's a helpful way of thinking about what it's like to move toward a horizon, because we can't always see it. But if we can just take the next faithful step and trust that the light will cast its illumination on the next when we get there. Okay, moving on. I spoke about this a little bit in the sermon today, so if you listen to that, I'm basically going to touch on this briefly and in a slightly different way. For my money, accepting what we do not choose and cannot change is one of the most courageous decisions we make, and it is the most difficult. And even the Serenity Prayer, with its emphasis on accepting the things we cannot change, exhorts us to change the things we can, which speaks to the part of us that will always want to change the things that we want to change. And so when we're faced with a terrible situation, denial is typically our first response, because our brains simply can't wrap themselves around this new reality. And when the facts stubbornly persist, we do whatever we can to avert the outcome we dread. And this is instinctual too, because we were created for life. And accepting what we do not choose invariably means making peace with suffering, a theme that runs through Christianity and every faith tradition. I think the Apostle Paul is clearest about that. For him, suffering was, in the end, a way he could be in solidarity with Christ. And in one passage, he even boasts of suffering because, suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, he tells us. Yay, suffering! Hope does not disappoint us, he says, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. And one time, you may remember, he talks about how that happened for him, his own inner struggle. It's the only time he talks of it, and how he came by grace to accept what he didn't choose. He called it, do you remember? Thorn in the flesh. He had a thorn in the flesh, leaving us to speculate on what that was. He doesn't disclose the nature of the pain, only that it was always with him. And his prayer was that he be spared the suffering, that the Lord take it from him. 3 times I prayed, he said. But Jesus' answer was always the same. My grace is sufficient for you, and my strength will be revealed. My grace will be revealed through your weakness. I think about that a lot, although I confess I pray way more than 3 times for the things I didn't choose to be taken from me. But when those prayers go unanswered, or as in Paul's case, the answer is a decisive no, where is there to turn but acceptance? But even still, acceptance doesn't come easily. I wonder what you have had to accept that you wouldn't choose, you wouldn't wish on others. It's dangerous when we fall into theological assertions about suffering, when we say things like it's God's will for us, everything happens for a reason, maybe it's our fault. The only pastoral response to suffering that's worth anything at all is empathic presence, right? To be with someone. And whenever possible, to ameliorate the pain. But when those efforts fail, and we're left to find whatever meaning we can find in the trials we must endure, there's a grace to know that there's strength. And those who have walked that path can speak of it. We'd never want to say it for them. We certainly wouldn't want someone to say it for ourselves. But when we can say it, as one woman said to me once, I am not grateful that it happened, but I will be forever grateful for the person I became as a result. That's something. I'm not saying it's a universal thing. I'm just saying that when it happens, there's a grace in that. And in that vein, I'd like to read you something that Martin Luther King wrote. You may know well that he spoke quite a bit about redemptive suffering, which is the acceptance of what you would never choose for the sake of love, for the sake of another, clearly distinguishing it from passive suffering that perpetuates injustice. And he also believed that redemptive suffering is what unites us to Christ as a pure expression of sacrificial love. And he didn't like to talk about what his public ministry cost him personally. But there was one persistent editor of the Christian Century back in 1960, so King was still young, he was still in his 20s. And he was asked to to talk about what his struggles had cost him. And this is what he wrote. Due to my involvement in the struggle for my people, I have known very few quiet days. And then he matter-of-factly listed some of the things he had endured. 5 arrests and time spent in Alabama jails, 2 bombings of his home, multiple death threats, and a stabbing that almost killed him. Right? And then he says this, as my sufferings mounted, I realized that there were 2 ways I could respond to my situation, either to react with bitterness or to seek to transform the suffering into a created force. I decided to follow the latter course. Recognizing the necessity of suffering, I have tried to make of it a virtue. And it became for him not a political strategy. It was, for him, a way of life. Right? I'm coming down to the last minute here. If you just click onto the slide for the next one, stepping up to the plate. I promised myself that I would mention something to you about this. I spoke at length about stepping up to the plate in my sermon, and I wanted to just talk about failure. Because what happens, I use the analogy, for those of you who are here, of stepping up to the plate and swinging, right? You know, because it's your turn at bat. Well, what happens when you swing and miss? And what happens when you swing and miss and it's really terrible? It's really a disaster. What if you swing and miss and the consequences are felt on other people? And you realize, worse still, that you missed because you weren't prepared or that you were incompetent. And there you were in your failure for all the world to see. And I just want to leave you with this, that how we respond in the face of failure is consequential. And if we can learn to accept failure as a part of growth, trusting that those experiences will become part of a larger narrative of courage, we can glean the lessons we need to learn from the pain and the embarrassment and move on. And so the next time we're up, we're better prepared. And in retrospect, we can see how essential failure is in learning to be brave. And I'm going to close with this. This is something that I guess you're National Public Radio listeners because you're having the president come and speak to you. So any of you listen to Ira Glass, This American Life, one of my favorite hosts and shows. And he gave a lecture once where he acknowledged that he was talking to artists, right? And he was acknowledging the distance between artistic aspiration, especially in the beginning, and our first attempts to do creative work. And he says to them very bluntly, for the first couple of years you're making stuff, what you're making isn't very good. And what you're making is kind of a disappointment to you. And he said, but what the artist does next determines everything. And if you are just starting out, or if you're still in this phase, you've got to know that it's normal and it's the most important thing. You have got to do a lot of work. It's only by going through a volume of work that you're going to catch up and close the gap. And then the work that you're making will be as good as your ambitions, right? But you have to get used to failing and being disappointed and persevering. And my final word to you in all of this is how important persevering is in a courageous life. Just one step in front of the other, not resting or not assuming that it's only about the big moments, but about the little ones. That as one woman learned from her grandfather when she was 5 years old, and I'll close with this. He gave her a pot, a little cup with dirt in it, and he told her that if she watered it every day, something wonderful would happen. And so she watered it every day for a few days, and nothing happened, absolutely nothing. And so she took it to her grandfather when he came back to visit. He said, "Look, it's not working," and he just said, "No, just keep watering day by day." And so she did it again. She started to forget to water, but only out of love for her grandfather. She'd make herself get up and water the plant. And then, of course, the amazing thing happened. This little plant sprouted. So she brings it to her grandfather and says, "See, look, Grandpa, look, it happened." And she said, "It was at the water that made that?" And he said, "No, little one, it was your faithfulness, day by day, putting a little bit of water in your cup." And maybe we can think about that when we think about courage and perseverance, that if we can get up each day and put a little in our cup, we have the ingredients that God can use to not only teach us how to be brave, but to show up in ways that amaze even us when we do. So, thank you for listening. What I would love most of all is for you all to turn to one another at some point tonight or at the dinner table tomorrow and just talk about your own lives and what if anything, has been prompted in your memories from the day. But if there's anyone here who has a question or a comment for me in the minutes we have left, I'll gladly answer them. You don't have to have any. We can go right to the cheese and what's waiting us on the other side. But if you have anything at all that you'd like to ask or raise, I'd be happy to gather with you. Yes. I think maybe if you, to go to the live stream.
Would you please come over here to ask your question or make your comment?
Hi, I'm Jim. Would you care to comment on whether your St. John's experience in 2020, I think, continues to have impacts and resonates with you? I know that sometimes when people are involved in controversial matters, that there's a continuing back channel of things that go on. I'm wondering how you, if that's true, how you cope with it.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Not really. It was a news cycle. And the one thing I think that made it, obviously what the president did touched a nerve. And it happened, I was lucky, a couple of people that I talked to in that moment when I was trying to say, like, what do we do? Someone said to me, people need to hear from you tonight. So we just found people that were, and it happened to fit into the news cycle, and then that got picked up, and it lasted for about 4 days. And my staff was very kind and only let me read the letters that were affirming. So, and when I asked what was the ratio, they said about 50-50. So revealing the way our country is. I think for me, and I wrote about this at the beginning, the most important thing that happened to me was later, when I realized that if I was going to step into this work for justice, I needed to stay in the game, that it wasn't about being in front of a microphone, and that the people who inspired me were the ones who were sitting in the hot sun day after day, who are just working the slow path of justice, and especially now since there's been such a pendulum shift in the country, to just stay in the game. And so I would say it's a personal challenge more than a societal one. But thank you for asking. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you. I'll be out. I'm not going anywhere if you want to talk with me when I'm outside, or better yet, talk among yourselves and learn from each other. And God bless you as you approach Holy Week and all that it asks of us and offers. I'm so honored to have been a part of this worshiping community for the day, and I think you're very blessed, and you also have important work to do. So thank you to all of you.